Across this series, we have met the companies that make the chips, move the freight, refine the fuel, and sell the world its desires. But a stranger question sits behind all of them. Who actually owns the companies? And behind a surprising number of them sits a very unusual kind of giant, one whose only real product is ownership itself. That company is Berkshire Hathaway, and this is a series about the companies that run the world. Berkshire represents the purest form of power in all of capitalism, the power of ownership. It makes almost nothing of its own. Instead, it owns dozens of whole companies outright and large pieces of many more besides. Its entire business, in the end, is simply buying good businesses and then keeping them. What it owns is staggering in its breadth. A vast insurance empire, one of America's great railroads, an enormous energy utility, and a shelf of household names from candy to batteries, alongside huge stakes in some of the most famous companies on the entire planet. It was built, patiently, over 60 years, by Warren Buffett and his late partner Charlie Munger. They took a failing textile mill and, through nothing more exotic than patience and compounding, transformed it into one of the most valuable companies in the world. The secret engine, curiously, is insurance. When you insure with Berkshire, your premiums come in now, and any claims are paid out only much later. And in the long meantime, Berkshire gets to invest that vast pool of other people's money, which it calls the float, entirely for its own gain. The scale of that float is extraordinary. It amounts to well over $100 billion, a colossal and remarkably cheap pool of capital, always there to be deployed. It is a permanent tailwind at the company's back that almost no ordinary rival can ever hope to match. But the truest magic of all is simply time. Money reinvested patiently, again and again over decades, grows along a curve that looks gentle at first and then, quite suddenly, becomes vast. Berkshire is, more than anything else, the act of compounding made into a corporation. And unlike the traders and the deal makers it buys in order to keep, very often forever, that deep patience lets the businesses it owns plan for the long term, and it lets a family selling its life's work hand it over and then genuinely sleep at night. Stranger still, it owns dozens of companies while barely managing them at all. The managers of each business run their own affairs. The head office is famously tiny. It is a rare thing indeed, ownership almost entirely without meddling. Its great modern rival is the humble index fund, which now quietly owns a sliver of nearly everything, passively and for almost no fee at all. It is a completely different answer to the very same question of how one might come to own the whole economy. Then there is private equity, which also buys whole companies but loads them with debt and looks to sell them again within a few short years. It is, in almost every respect, the precise opposite of Berkshire's patient promise of forever. And here the whole series quietly comes together. Look closely, and Berkshire owns pieces of exactly the kinds of giants we have explored: the railroads, the consumer brands, the banks, the technology. It is, in a very real sense, a single company built out of many other companies. So we reach the question this series always asks of what would break if Berkshire vanished. It would be less a shortage of any physical thing than a deep shock to confidence and to the very idea of patient ownership. And an enormous single holder of American business would be broken up and scattered to the winds. Which brings us to the final uncomfortable question. As the ownership of the economy steadily concentrates into conglomerates, into index funds, into private equity, fewer and fewer entities quietly come to own more and more of absolutely everything. Is it truly healthy that the ownership of the world is pooling like this into so very few hands? To be fair, and it genuinely deserves saying, Berkshire's whole model rewarded patience over reckless speculation, and it handed millions of ordinary shareholders a real stake in a vast and sober empire. It is, in many ways, capitalism at its most long-term and its very least frenzied. And that is the deeper lesson, not just of this giant, but of the whole series. Behind every single company that runs the world stands the quiet question of who owns it. And the deepest power of all is not to make, not to move, not to sell, but simply to own patiently and then to let time itself do the rest. So we end exactly where all the others were quietly leading, with ownership itself. The chips and the ships, the steel and the drinks, the rails and the reactors, someone, somewhere, owns them all. And the quietest giant of them all understood the oldest truth in business, that to own and to wait is a kind of power that outlasts everything else.